Hey Dana, unfortunately the best way to help the kids remember the how oxidation is losing and reduction is gaining electrons is by giving them a little bit of background on what a redox reaction is. And in chemistry, it's all about the oxidation numbers, but they don't have a strong chemistry background, so you can use it explaining with charges. Chlorine is a -1, etc. Because charges are oxidation numbers, but not all oxidation numbers are charges. So they should remember this from back in 8th grade physical science, that the first part of the periodic table creates a +1 charge and then a +2. The middle is a +2. Some of them are variable charges. You don't have to get into that. You can just tell them that if you want to. +3, and then we say plus or -4 because it's just as easy to gain 4 electrons as it is to give 4 electrons to get the full octet rule. And then, -3, -2, -1, and then the noble gases already have a full 8 electrons, and so they're 0. If little smarty pants ask about the bottom 2 parts of the periodic table, they are so big and unstable that they don't really form any charges. They just break apart into other atoms. Remind them about what the parts of the atom are. You have protons and neutrons both in the nucleus. Remind them what the charges are. Protons is a plus, neutrons is 0, electrons go around, and they're a negative charge. In AP Chem, we usually do that on like the first 2 or 3 days of school. They tend to remember that, so hopefully that should not be too big of a problem with that. So with sodium, also remind them an element has a charge of 0, a pure element, because it is an equal number of protons and an equal number of electrons, so they cancel each other out. Okay. So with sodium is over here, and so we know sodium will end up making a positive charge ion. Okay. So in order to get that positive charge ions, sodium element has a 0 charge. Okay. So to get that positively charged sodium ion, we are going to have to lose 1 electron. So what's extra? We have extra protons. So the way we write it would be like this. Okay. And the key for them is that the charges have to balance out. Okay. So I have a 0 charge on this side, so 0, 0 equals +1 plus, this is a -1 because it's 1 electron, so that equals 0, so it's balanced. So in this case, when you have so here for a redox part, we have oxidation occurring because we've lost an electron. Okay. But if we look at the numbers, the biggest important thing is looking at the oxidation, or the numbers, or the charges. So sodium starts with a 0 and goes up to a +1. So an oxidation number, the oxidation part of the redox reaction has an increase in the oxidation numbers. Now if you look at the other way around, if we look at, say, chlorine, ends up over here. Okay, chlorine. And we know chlorine needs to make a -1 charge because it's over in that side. How are we going to make a -1? charge for chlorine, the only way to do that is to add electrons. And again, your charges have to be equal on both sides, so a -1 plus a 0 equals a -1. Okay, so therefore it's the same. And we look at what happened to the chlorine. Okay, the chlorine went from a 0 charge to a -1 charge. So this time we went from 0 to a -1. This is reduction. Okay. It gains electrons. So what happened to the number? The oxidation number, or you can say the charges. The charge number was reduced. So by adding electrons, you are ultimately adding negative stuff. Therefore, you are reducing your charge. So that is the kind of short, super simple version. That is really the only way to explain it so they understand it. Is this one you've got to see the chemistry a little bit. There's all sorts of the cutesy things, I'm sure. You know, you've got the oil rig. Oxidation is lost. Reduction is gained. You've got Leo goes grr. It says goes grr. Lose electrons is oxidation. Gain electrons, reduction. Outside of that, those are your little mnemonics, but to understand why it happens, and some of those kids need to understand why, because the words are confusing, but it's all about the number, the charge is being reduced and going from 0 to a -1, or it could be a +1 going down to a 0. As long as the charge is getting reduced, then it's oxidation, or sorry, it's reduction. And I don't know if you guys get into the fact that redox reactions occur together. You can't have one without the other. Okay, so example, if we have iron combining with chlorine, technically chlorine's diatomic. So what we would do in chemistry is look at each of these charges. Okay, iron, this is in the element form. There's nothing attached to it, so it's a 0. Chlorine, it's Cl2. They should know that it's that's an elemental chlorine. They may not remember that. Okay. But if it's not connected to anybody else and there's no little charge number next to it, it's a 0. And then over here, you have a compound, so you have to look at what the charges are to put the compound together. Iron is technically here. And so again, you can tell them unless otherwise stated, it's a +2 charge. In this case, it is a +2. And chlorine, even though there's two of them, one chlorine has a -1 charge there. Okay, so in chemistry we end up looking at we look at the iron and then we look at the chlorine. So the iron has gone from a 0 to a +2. So what that tells me is the iron, ooh, that's a bad choice. The iron is what was being oxidized because we had an increase in the charge number or oxidation number. The chlorine went from 0 to a -1. Therefore, the chlorine was reduced because the number decreased, aka was reduced. Okay, so the two have to go together. Someone has to give up electrons and someone has to take them. So essentially the iron gave chlorine its 2 electrons in order to be reduced to get a lower number, and the chlorine of course had to accept the electrons. So the two go together. You can't have one without the other. So hopefully this helps a little bit. Let me know if you need anything else, and you know, depending on what day or time it is, I could, you know, come in and give the quick version of this in class if you want, if that would be helpful too. Just let me know. So hopefully this helps. Okay. Bye.